for all.
Ms. McGill, roll call.
Chair Longstreet,
Here.
Connor,
Present.
Forcell, Gonzalez. Vice Chair Larimore Hall is not present.
Okay. Any changes to the agenda today, Ms. Rapp?
No, Chair Longstreet. Boy, I have to get another chair name in there, don't I? Just when I get trained, you get a new chair. I did want to just note that we do have 2 time certain items. They are both city staff, so if the time is a little fudged, it should be okay. The first time certain item is number 7, which is the tree and landscaping preservation and enforcement procedures update. Jill Zachary is giving that report, and she needs to be at another meeting, so we put that on the agenda early. And then our finance director, Bob Pearson, will be presenting item number 8 on Measure G, and we've estimated that time at 5 o'clock.
Very good. We will try to hold to those closely. Written communications. We all received a letter, a very nice letter about a family whose son participated in our after-school program, so that was good to get. It's nice to get positive feedback on our programming. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the Commission for up to 1 minute on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the Commission today. Is there anyone here for public comment? And I would take this opportunity to remind people, if you're here for an agenda item, to please fill out one of the forms in the back and put the number of the item up in the upper corner. Okay, now we move to community service recognition.
And actually, Chair Longstreet, I apologize. For the convenience of those people who are here for item number 6, commercial activities in parks, just for their planning purposes, we won't get to that item until after 5 o'clock. So if, there's no need for them to sit, they can go get a coffee or whatever. So, and being sensitive to their time.
Thank you. Okay. And we're at community service recognition. Ms. Rapp, did you want to introduce that item?
Yes. Today we have a special recognition for the Santa Barbara School District and various personnel, and our aquatics supervisor, Rich Hanna, will make that presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Longstreet and Commissioners. It's my pleasure to be here. When I recommended the 10-week closure of Los Baños during the summer earlier this year, I think some people in the swimming community may have thought I had inhaled too much chlorine or something like that. But it was done with the recommendation with the hope that our great agreement with the Santa Barbara School District and the partnership that we have would make it possible to relocate many of the aquatic programs that are scheduled at Los Baños to the various high schools. Although all the high school principals, athletic directors, coaches, and other school district staff could not join us today, I am pleased to see that Dave Hetjonk, the facilities director, is here. The deep end wall replacement and replaster project would not have turned out so successful had it not been for the cooperative spirit and assistance received from the school district and their staff. The attention to our aquatic needs and great collaboration made it possible for the aquatic section to relocate over 100% or 800% of the summer programs offered at Los Baños, including all of the Santa Barbara Swim Club programs, lap swimming, swim lessons, and recreation swim, which we relocated to all 3 of the high schools in the area. I'd feel remiss if I did not quickly acknowledge the outstanding efforts that made it possible to relocate the 2.5-day 4th of July Semana Nautica swim meet. If you think back, I received a call on Wednesday, the Wednesday before the Friday for the first day of the swim meet, that the Gap Fire had closed DP. They were staging there in San Marcos High School. It just become a shelter. Within the next 24 hours, we managed to reschedule that swim meet, which had, over 1,000 participants coming to the area to swim, and we were fortunate enough to be able to move that to Santa Barbara High School and actually run a successful meet that went off without any hitches. Without the credit due to the school district, Dave, Dr. Sarvis, who couldn't be here, and all the staff that we worked with. Dr. Sarvis is here, thank you. this really couldn't have been possible. We couldn't have got through this without all their help. So on behalf of myself and the swimmers in this community, we just wanted to say thanks.
We're pretty good at this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Let's see if that works now.
the light's on, so.
Yeah, there we go. Well, yeah, here you go. This one is for, it says, in appreciation, the City of Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation Department presented to the Santa Barbara School District the 24th day of September 2008 in recognition of the collaborative effort and cooperative spirit which contributed to the success of the Los Baños Capital Project and enabled aquatic programs to continue during the 9-week summer
Red now.
aquatic facility.
Does it need to be black? Does it need to be green? Turn it the other way.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, as you can imagine, from our pools at our high school sites, swimming is a big deal for us. So we were happy to partner with you on this.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, it was a true team effort. It was not just the school district people that scrambled, but it was city parks and recs people. And, you know, we got lucky that San Marcos High School pool, the contractor finished early. We got unlucky with the gap fire. But in times of emergencies, it seems everybody comes together and makes things work. And so it was, you know, we'd love to take a lot of the credit, but there was a lot of hard work by city staff also. So thank you.
Ms. Connell?
Thank you. I'd just like to say how glad I am about how well the City Parks and Rec and the city schools work together, and it's very obvious by all of you. Thank you.
And I think we'd all be remiss not to point out that this is what happens when you have a lack of public pool space, and though we don't see that in the near future, we all are aware that we really do need a second public pool in the city of Santa Barbara, but we appreciate your cooperation. Thank you. Ms. Rapp, we should move to Commissioner Committee Assignment Reports. Does anyone have anything to report this month?
I did participate in the Youth Advisory Committee, and first meeting as far as the
Is his mic not on?
Robert Rules and Orders.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I was at the Tennis Advisory Committee meeting, and we discussed the new lighting and municipal stadium and some repairs that are necessary there. Discussed how we might redo the municipal stadium, which is in need of repair, and hopefully, is our new system failing us? A new system working now? Thank you. We discussed at the Tennis Advisory Committee the current condition of the municipal stadium and how we might improve that, and there's an evaluation being done currently on what is necessary, but it is old, does need some work. It is a historical structure, and it would be very nice to come up with some money and some either by the private or the public sector to redo the stadium. And the lighting that I spoke of is the new lighting system, which is saving us a substantial amount of money in that the lights are now can be operated individually when in use rather than being on when no one is actually playing tennis. And the third thing is the new sound wall that Caltrans is putting in at Municipal. As I'm sure anyone that drives by on the freeway will see, they've torn out all the shrubbery and started digging, and we're looking forward to, it's been many, many years that tennis players have complained about the noise at Municipal, and we're looking forward to an adequate sound wall, which will cut down a lot of that noise.
Very good.
I'd like to report that I was at the 90-plus party, which every year is just a wonder to behold, and I was very fortunate to be able to go. Hundreds of people over 90 years old. How many, Ms. Rapp? I can't remember.
254.
Was it 300?
I believe that we had over 300 guests at the party who were over 90, and we had over 500 people in attendance.
Well, it was amazing. I want to thank Jason Bryan, who every year with staff puts this on, as well as Larry Crandell, who was the host and did a fabulous job with his son, Stephen, and it's always a wonderful thing. And every year, it seems like the people over 90 are living longer, so every year we have more participants, and that's really great. Thank you for that.
I, too, attended that luncheon, and it was wonderful. I think we have a good group of collaborators on that one, and staff did a wonderful job. I attended the Douglas Family Preserve Technical Advisory Committee meeting, and I'm happy to report that the management plan is making great progress, and a few tweaks here and there, I think, but it's almost ready for publication. Also, the Creeks meeting was adjourned to Sycamore Creek, where we reviewed a project that is might possibly be happening with the Housing Authority in a restoration project. And then I also attended the luncheon of, and I'm probably going to get all the initials wrong, but the Greater Santa Barbara Lodging and Restaurant Association, to hear Ms. Rapp report on the condition of the beaches, and Mr. Cameron give the annual report on the Creeks Division progress. And so that was a very interesting meeting. And I think the one thing I took away from it is there were some complaints about the conditions of our beaches, and really our beaches have so much seaweed on them because they're a living entity, and there's a reason we can't take it all off. And it might not look like some of those pristine beaches, but some of those are pretty dead ecosystems. So I think we should be happy with our seaweed. So it was a pretty busy month. I also I would report out now, I did attend the meeting on Monday night, most of it for an item later on our agenda. Okay, Commission and Staff Communications.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, at this time, I would like to introduce our new golf manager. Our new business manager, Scott McGregor, was actually out ill today, so he will be officially introduced to you at your October meeting. But as you know, for the last few months, the department has been involved in recruitment processes to replace two of our managers who retired. And we're very pleased to introduce to you Mark Reed, who is our new golf manager, stepping in for Scott Jorgensen out at the golf course. We're very pleased to have Mark on board. He's very well skilled for this position. He was the assistant superintendent at Green Hills Country Club in Millbrae, California, and a number of course positions before that. And then most recently at the Valley Club of Montecito, he was their golf superintendent. So we went through a thorough vetting process. We're very pleased to have Mark on board and know that he brings a lot of experience and passion to the job, and we're thrilled to have him.
Excellent. Welcome aboard.
Members of the Commission, thank you for having me. As Nancy stated, my name's Mark Reed. I'm a native of Cleveland, Ohio. I moved to California in 2002. There's a great staff at the golf course, and a great staff has been put together in the Parks and Recreation Department. I look forward to advancing the golf course and making it a great experience for the members of Santa Barbara County and visitors to the county. And I thank you for having me here and for the position.
Well, welcome. Welcome. Any questions?
Yeah, Mark, where did you say you worked before you in Montecito? Did Nancy
Valley
say?
Club.
Yeah, where?
The Valley Club.
Oh, so you're moving up. Congratulations.
It was a great transition.
This is not a lateral move. This is quite an upward move for you. We're really glad to see you there. And you're going to have some big shoes to fill. I know with Scott leaving and everything, but really look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Scott.
And I'm sure you'll really enjoy it there.
Thank you for having me.
Great staff, by the way, over there. So I'm
great
sure you've met them all and now know. And really hard-working, long-term staff there. And I think you'll really enjoy it.
Well, Scott's, like you said, big shoes to fill, and he's done a great job, and I hope to build on those things that he implemented at the golf course and advance it. But
Well,
thank you for having me.
congratulations. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Great. Well,
And additionally, I would just like to officially make the announcement. I sent all of you an email, but as you know, we've been in a recruitment process also for the director of golf with Richard Chavez, our director of golf, who has been with the golf course for over 28 years, is retiring as of December 1st. And so we've been through a series of interviews. We had actually an RFP and proposals that we received from several people in the community for becoming the director of golf. And on Friday, we selected Chris Tallarico, who also is an employee with Richard Chavez out at the golf course for many years, to follow in his footsteps. Richard joins us in being very pleased, looking ahead to Chris's success. We will now be entering into the final contract negotiation stage and hope to take that contract to City Council by the end of October. So, and at that point, it'll be final, and we'll do a press release, but for all intents and purposes, we're very much looking forward to working with Chris Tallarico at the golf course, and once everything is final, we'll bring Chris to you to be officially introduced.
excellent. I'm glad that's all going smoothly. I know those are big changes within the department. Another thing I think we should bring up at this time as a public announcement is the fact that we are going to be having some vacancies on the Parks and Recreation Commission, and that we're looking for applicants. People should go down to either contact the department or the city clerk's office for their applications. And I would just say from personal experience, it's a very rewarding thing to do. It's a good way to learn about your community, and I have gotten a great deal back from it, much more, I think, than I've ever given. So I would encourage people to apply. Anybody else have anything to add, Annette? You're vacating. So.
I agree. It's been a wonderful, wonderful time on the Parks and Rec Commission. We are working with a staff that's excellent and very communicative, and there's a lot that gets done, and it's very fulfilling. Thank you.
And I would just add that the application is available online, as is information related to applying for the commission. And from a department perspective, we really hope that, we know that there are a lot of people in the community that appreciate our city parks, programs, and facilities, and hope that there will be people who are interested enough to take that active role in the commission. We've been very lucky with our commissioners and having very engaged, involved commissioners who care deeply about our community, and we're looking for people who will follow in those footsteps. So, and I'm happy to talk to anyone who is interested. I'm happy to have people make suggestions of people that I could contact and talk more about that role. So our commission is very important to us.
Thank you. And now we move on to the Youth Council report.
And Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, since we don't yet have our intern appointed, he is here tonight for us to introduce him to you, but he will be going to the City Council for formal approval later in October. And so Diego Torres Santos is with us. Diego, if you'd like to come up to the podium and maybe just say a little bit about you. I know they'll get the report with all the information later, but...
Yeah, good evening. My name is Diego, like Nancy Rapp said. I am right now on the Youth Council, and I look forward to hopefully working with you guys in the future.
Well, it's very valuable to us. We've had great youth interns on the council, and each one of them contribute a great deal. We really value your opinion, so we're looking forward to having you on board.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll see you next month when you're an official You'll be up here. We'll have a seat warmed up for you.
Thank you.
One comment that I would just give to the commission as a heads up, the staff has been working with the Council Committee on Youth and Children to talk about how we can encourage more youth interns on other city boards and commissions. And there were a couple of recommendations that are making its way through the city council process that I think this commission should give consideration to when Diego officially joins us in October. One would be, the recommendation is that a commissioner be appointed as a mentor to the commission intern, and so you might talk amongst yourselves for who that would be, and that the intern be seated next to the mentor, and instead of at the end of the dais where we have traditionally had newer people sit at the end of the dais. But you might think about that so that when Diego joins the commission, we're welcoming him with those decisions being made.
I think those are both very good ideas and would be helpful both to the commission and to the intern. So
Yes.
We'll see. Did you have anything to report? Did you want to make a report on anything over the summer?
Chris McDermott will be giving the Youth Council report. We're going to let Diego off the hook this month. He can give the report next year.
I think it should be noted also that we're discussing.
Just push it. There you go.
Oh, it's a new technology here. It should be noted that we've discussed the issue of trying to get the youth advisor or a representative to be a voting member of this commission. We've discussed the issue, and we're going to be further discussing that particular situation. And Diego is a very talented young man that I hadn't seen in about 16 years. I've known since he was a child. But it's amazing that youth in our community are becoming involved in many phases of our activities. And welcome, Diego.
Alrighty.
It's all yours, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just, showing Diego what he's going to be doing pretty soon. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Parks and Recreation Commission. I'm Chris McDermott. I am the former Youth Council Chair. Unfortunately, members of the Youth Council couldn't make it to today's meeting, but I do have the opportunity to give this report for you because I am the Youth Council Assistant until I leave for school in January, and I'm very stoked. I'm living vicariously through this year's current Youth Council. So here's the report on what Youth Council is doing. So we have identified a youth as the Parks and Rec intern, and that's Diego. You just met him. Great guy. And the item is going to go before the City Council on October 14th, so that'd be a good meeting to attend. And I'm pretty sure he has his interview with the mayor soon, so we'll all wish him luck on that. The Youth Council also hopes to make his introduction along with the rest of the Youth Council members at the October Parks and Recreation Commission. So not only will you meet Diego again, but you'll meet the rest of the Youth Council. And right now the Youth Council is almost full. We have one space open right now. And our final interviews are this Monday, September 29th at 5:15 in City Council chambers. And right now, for this Youth Council, actually a little over half are new members. So there's definitely a learning curve for all these members, but with the help of Susan and I, we're teaching them how it's going. We had our first youth leadership training on September 6th. There they learned the Robert's Rules of Orders. We actually had 100% participation, so this Youth Council is off to a great start. And Madam Mayor attended the conference for a little bit. And right now we have almost 100% of all public and private high schools represented on the Youth Council, which is great because we're getting a full variety of all the students that we have in Santa Barbara. And we're hoping to have a junior high representative on every subcommittee. And on to what we're working on right now. Several several agencies have been coming to the Youth Council for the past month, asking for help in collaborating with their projects, and Youth Council's accepted. So right now they're working on a project with Healing Souls of America to develop a leadership training for teens. And they will also be working with Teen Court, and they're overseeing the programs that they have, giving them feedback, letting them know what they should change. And also, they'll be working with City College, ADAP, Alcohol and Drug Counseling, Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Program, and CADA for Red Ribbon Week, which is October 18th through the 26th, and we'll have events at the Teen Center. So that'll be quite the happening place. And coming up on October 2nd is the Prevention for Suicide Speak Out, and they're going to be working, Youth Council is going to be working with the Glendon Association on the Giving Voice to Hope, which is a suicide prevention forum. And that's going to be at Santa Barbara High School on October 2nd. The time, I don't have it on my report. I'm pretty sure it's around 6 p.m. You can look it up. And I can email you what time it is once I get back to my office. And they're also going through a list of proposed projects that they're going to do this year. And all the subcommittees by November will have chosen their projects for the entire year. And of course, they'll go on with their regular scheduled speak outs and special events. And we'll obviously keep you updated on that through Diego. And the Teen Center Advisory Committee has been meeting, and members are changing right now because people are aging out. New members are coming in, and we're recruiting for new members to work with Youth Council, and we currently have 2 members on the Youth Council serving on that board. So that's what Youth Council's up to, and so we're off to a great start this year.
Excellent. I'm really pleased to hear that you have representatives from all the high schools. I think that's excellent. And the junior highs to keep them growing them up through the system. Yeah. Good. And Diego, we look forward to seeing you next month. Where do you go to school? San Marcos. Okay. Well, we'll forgive you, but that's okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Rosie. We are just about to 4:30. I think we can get through the summary of council actions. Are there any questions or anything on the summary of council actions? Okay. Let's approve the minutes if we have a minute here.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
1 abstention. It passes unanimously. All right. Now let's move to our 4:30 time certain tree landscaping preservation and enforcement procedures update.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, this presentation updating you on a significant effort which is making its way through all the different design review committees will be presented tonight by Tim Downey, our Urban Forest Superintendent, and Jill Zachary, our Assistant Director, is here as well. She's been fully engaged in that process as well.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, I'm here to present to you efforts that we've been going through in the tree and landscape preservation enforcement procedures. This process originated from some high-profile cases. City Council asked for staff to review our enforcement procedures. A team was put together from several offices within the city administrator's office, city attorney's office, community development, fire, and parks and recreation. The city currently regulates several things in the trees and landscape area: street trees, other public trees, our parks, our facilities, city properties, trees within the minimum front yard setback. These areas range in residential areas between 10 and 35 feet behind the public right-of-way. Trees in parking lots are historic and specimen trees. Trees on approved landscape plans trees and landscapes in the El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District are regulated. How do we currently regulate this vegetation? Street trees, a permit is required from Parks and Recreation for pruning or removal. Setback and parking lot trees, if there is a need to remove the tree or prune it in such a way that it's reduced by more than 1/3 or its natural character is significantly altered, that requires a permit from our office as well. In those cases where there's major pruning happening, there is a requirement that there's an arborist report stating the reasons for that. Those permits are free. The approved landscape plans are changes to those plans are reviewed by Community Development Department and, if necessary, referred to various other review bodies: Historic Landmarks Commission, Architectural Board of Review, Single Family Design Review Board, and changes in the El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District are reviewed by the Historic Landmark Commission. How do we currently enforce these regulations? Community Development does the enforcement for us, and I function as the technical expert in tree issues. We work together on these situations. City investigates the situation, determines whether there's a violation, and if so, issues an administrative citation, which may come with a $100 fine. If warranted, the fines are imposed on both the property owner and the company doing the work. Community Development enforces violations of the approved landscape plans. Typically, a warning letter is sent and certain requirements are placed depending on the situation. And if by a certain deadline that is not met, they receive fines. If it goes beyond that, it's referred to the city attorney's office for legal prosecution if necessary. The committee had looked at a number of the provisions and has come up with a number of recommendations to the municipal code. The preservations of trees, San Buenaventura Municipal Code 1524, we would like to include all those new policies in that code. In that code, we'd also like to add an exemption for tree trimming and removals required by the fire department in order to maintain defensible space and city wildland fire plan. We're recommending that tree measurement is consistent throughout the ordinance as measured at DBH, 4.5 feet above grade. We want to cross-reference all related tree codes in one section so that they'll be easy to find within the municipal code. We want to include a definition of maintain in the approval for landscape plans so that we're able to tell people if they're not maintaining their landscapes appropriately. We want to extend the current protection of setback and parking lot trees to those approved landscape plans. We also would like to define that a tree is in a setback if greater than 50% of the trunk is within the setback. Those are just clarifications to the existing code. Penalties for violations. Recommendation is to fine the property owner and the person and company who perform the work for the violation if that's warranted. The recommendation is to increase fines, and we have considered a sliding scale for single-family residents, multifamily, and commercial business owners. And we would like to require a follow-up action to correct any violation. And that can be a mitigation of replacement trees or a tree restoration plan. This is the proposed fine schedule. And as you can see, we have determined that tree companies and contractors should be the most responsible, knowing the codes that affect their jobs before they do the work. We want to create a voluntary educational opportunity for landscape professionals. The purpose of this is to educate them on the municipal codes that relate to them, and also provides for a list of contractors that we can refer to the public. It's recommended for further discussion whether or not oaks and sycamores larger than 8 inches diameter at breast height should be protected under the provisions of Santa Barbara Municipal Code, 15.24. Too many years at Ventura, I'm sorry. Those trees would be anywhere they exist on a property. As Chair Longstreet mentioned, we had a public workshop on September 22nd where we presented most of what you've already seen and asked them to answer or comment on the questions that are before you. Summary of those comments that we received to date. There was an agreement for an educational opportunity, but they didn't like the use of the word certification. They didn't feel that it should be any kind of certification. They felt that there needs to be a significant outreach once these things are changed and to advise of the requirements of the code. The consequences of violations need to be significant. There was some interest to find that trees are more important to protect than other landscape plants. There was some opposition to that, however. It was important to them that replacement value be considered. If a tree is removed, some sort of mechanism to get that value back. The city needs to have funding for enforcement, streamline the ordinance to make them easier to understand. Many concerns over maintenance of the approved landscape plan. And oaks and sycamores did not get discussed. Next steps, we've scheduled many review boards to look at these items, as well as the District Advisory Committee and this commission where we hope that you will be able to make a recommendation to send it to City Council for their approval. Our recommendation tonight is that you provide preliminary comments on this report.
Thank you. Comments, Mr. Frisell.
I have some questions about the fines that are proposed. Was it not, Nancy, you may remember this, that long ago, 4 or 5 years, that we were at $50 and we jumped up to $100? Didn't we go through all this? Okay, I just wanted to be sure. And that was when there was a lot of problems, not so much with the owners of the property, but with the people that were doing the pruning themselves. Now you say that we're going to jump for the first offense to between $250 and $500, second offense $500 to $1,000. I don't have any problem with the second offense. You know, if you do this, if you violate it twice, you should really have your hand slapped. But if it's the first time around, I'm have a little bit of a problem with charging $250 or $500 first time out. You know, people make mistakes, people misinterpret. You know, this could happen. If it was really an egregious thing and it was something very obvious, maybe so. But I'd have a problem with jumping from the $100 to the $250 to $500 for the first offense. Again, do it the second time, slam them. First time, maybe a little more leeway. And also, I do not understand the sliding scale for single families, multiple families, and commercial. Which would pay more and which less?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Forcell, the committee felt that contractors and people doing the business of trimming trees should should be aware of the municipal codes that relate to what they're doing and should be the most responsible to know those codes. So theirs would be the highest of that level. Secondly, multi-family property owners or managers should know codes more so than individual property owners. So we felt that they were at a moderate level, and a single-family property owners would be at that lowest level.
Well, I agree with you in some respects and disagree in others. As an appraiser for 28 years in this town, I will tell you there are many small commercial mom-and-pop little places, single users that are commercial, that are not managed by big property management companies, and those people I don't think should be, and there are a lot of people that own 3 or 4 units down on Bath Street or something, you know, that they don't have a management company handle it. I agree with you completely that if it's being managed by one of the big management companies in town, they should be much more aware of this. But I don't think that the penalty, just because you happen to be a person who owns multiple units or owns a commercial building, should be higher for you than a single family. And I don't think that your duty to understand the rules is any greater because you happen to have a commercial property rather than a single family. You know, what is, that seems more like, you know, bureaucratic thinking that, well, the people that have multiple units in commercial probably have more money, they're more easily able to pay the fees. You know, so that I would disagree with that, having that kind of a sliding scale.
Other comments?
Yes. Yes. In addition to that, what if you're landlord and you rent, and then the renter cuts a tree, and who's going to be liable? Without the consent of the landlord.
Commissioner Longstreet and Gonzalez, we haven't specifically addressed that issue yet, but it allows us to find, the current municipal code allows us to find both the property owner and the person doing the work. If it would be appropriate not to find the owner because they were unaware, then that fee may be waived.
Now, and you mentioned also that to provide some education as far as the code is concerned. You know, there's a lot of people that cut trees, that prune trees and things like that. Maybe you should include in the training that if there's a citation, that it be mandatory for them to participate in the education program also, in addition to the fine.
I just have one little comment.
Or not?
I disagree with Commissioner Forcell on one thing, where he's saying that he thinks that we're charging the people because they have more money. Well, if you're in the business of collecting rents and having many different homes, it would be in your purview, I would think, to know the rules. And not that because of that, it's just because it's their business. So it's, you know, that's the way I look at it.
How do you make a wild leap of logic like that and say that they have other properties? Maybe that's the only property they have and they live in one of the units, or maybe that's how they survive. Maybe that is their income. There's a lot of small property owners in Santa Barbara that have 1 or 2 properties, and that is their source of income.
Right.
I will tell you that from personal experience.
So therefore, they should be up on the rules. That's just my thoughts on it. Okay?
Okay.
And I would have to tend to agree with Ms. Connor on that.
Wow. Surprise.
I know. And I also think that the fines that you're proposing are quite minimal, really. I mean, I think it with a good amount of publicity, it's a deterrent, and that's what we're after right now. It does us no good to find somebody for a dead tree. It's dead and gone. So it has to be something that deters these kinds of actions. And, of course, we prefer to educate, which I think is a large component of what you want to do. I would further have a question. Would we have the power for a multiple offender to revoke their business license in the city of Santa Barbara? I mean, that would be, and I don't expect you to have the answers to these questions. I think we're in the process of fleshing things out for you to take back and work on. But, you know, if we have a chronic offender, what is our recourse? And we know that there are some, there's some people that do things like that. I don't think knowing this kind of code is any different than the building code or any of the other things you're supposed to know when you have a piece of property. Doesn't mean everybody obeys it all the time, but I would just really like to see the emphasis on when this is streamlined and you've got this all ready to roll out, that, you know, it goes out in the water bills, that people get a lot of information on it, Channel 18, that, you know, we're not looking to blindside everybody. We're looking here to save the trees that we have in Santa Barbara. So I think if we keep that in mind, we do the best job for it. I thought the meeting was interesting the other night, and it was, you know, I'm glad you're doing that. I think there were some differing opinions there, and it's good to get it all out on the table early on. And I also like the idea of simplifying it for the average person to be able to look at one location for all the tree issues. So, you know, we don't have this, oops, I didn't know thing. And it came out at that meeting, I've got to say, that people said they'd willingly pay the fine. And there's a certain attitude like that. No, that people say, well, you know, too bad. I want to do what I want to do. So, you know, we're fighting an uphill battle in this one, and I appreciate all the work you've done. So, are there any further comments? I mean, it's going on to the other commissions, and then it'll come back to us.
Chair Longstreet and members of the commission, we have it on your agenda tonight as an introduction, in part so that you're up to speed on the work that we've done, and also in part because we are going to other boards and commissions. Ultimately, we will be coming back to you to ask you for a recommendation regarding these recommendations when we go back to City Council, and we would do that at the October meeting.
Well, I commend you for doing this. I think we have had a few incidents recently, some of the bigger ones in commercial properties, that made a huge difference in the landscape of the community. So thank you. All right. Does that conclude this? Are we going to move to our trees? We have about 12 minutes. Do you want to go back and we'll go back to our tree items. Item 5, do we have any speakers for any of our tree items tonight? Okay. So we'll be able to get through these in the next few minutes. Welcome back, Mr. Downey. We have approval of the following street tree removal requests: 14 East Valerio and 102 North Hope Avenue. Is there anything further to report on these?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioners, at 14 East Valerio, the tree is barely surviving at this point. The committee and staff felt that it made good arboricultural sense to go ahead and remove this tree and replace it with a designated species, and that is our recommendation on that item.
Okay. And we'll do them. We can do them together. 102 North Hope, because they're both approvals. 102
North Hope has 5 jacarandas on the San Remo side of the property. These trees. There are actually 6 jacarandas and 1 bottle tree on the side of that property. We're only requesting 5 trees at this point. The trees have been repeatedly topped by the utility company. Their ultimate size is much too large to continue to maintain them underneath those wires. In their current condition, they are not an asset to the community. Okay. Strategic Advisory Committee and staff determined it would be best to remove these trees and replace it with a species that could be maintained underneath those utility wires. Item E3 in your packet will be covered later, but that would be a designation change for this section of the street. Street Advisory Committee and staff recommend that these trees be approved for removal.
Okay. Do I hear a motion?
Yes, I approve to uphold the Street Tree Advisory Committee on item A1 and 2, 14 East Valerio and 102 North Hope for tree removal.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now we come to item B, deny the following street tree removal request, 1331 Mountain.
The tree at 1331 Mountain is a liquid amber tree. The requester is a neighbor at 1335. The tree is healthy. There are no observable defects to the neighboring driveway that can be attributed directly to the tree. There are defects, but I can't attribute them directly to it. The Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff determined that this tree should not be removed, and that is their recommendation.
Okay. Okay. Motion?
Okay, I move to deny the following street trees, which are 1331 Mountain Avenue, and uphold the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we move to item C, approve the following setback tree removals.
Chair Connor, you want to
Let's do them together. Let's do C1 and 2.
509 West Los Olivos is an avocado tree in the setback area. There's a development scheduled for this property, and the driveway entrance is scheduled at the location where this tree is. The tree does not, in its current condition, does not provide a large benefit to the community. It's been topped and hasn't been allowed to grow to its natural stature. The Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend that you approve this removal on the condition that another tree be planted that has the potential to grow to the size that the avocado tree had potential for. And item C2, at 1226 San Pascual, there are 3 chamois ash trees that we stopped from being removed, and the trees are much too large for the space that they're in. They are creating large amount of hardscape damage in the area. The Street Advisory Committee and staff both determined that it would be appropriate to recommend removal of these trees on the condition that 3 California sycamore trees, at least 24-inch box size, replace them, and the applicant has requested that in their application.
Okay. Discussion? Any questions? Motion?
Move for approval of 5C1 and 2 to concur with staff recommendations.
Second.
Discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, item D, 1 and 2, deny the following setback trees.
Item D1 is 337 Vista Pacifica, a Eucalyptus globulus, blue gum eucalyptus in the setback adjacent to Cliff Drive. The request was because the tree leans over the house and was dangerous. The tree does have a lean, however, it is not over the house at this time, and there were no observable dangerous conditions with the tree. Based on that information, Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend you deny this removal. Item D2 is 1415 West Valerio, Deodar Cedar. Reasons were that the tree was messy and it lifts the bricks and has damaged a wall. The tree is within a small patio area that's encased with bricks right up to the trunk of the tree. Staff recommends removing some of the bricks to provide some room for root growth. This patio is the pathway to other entrances of the house. It's rather small, but the committee and staff felt that the tree should be considered a skyline tree. It's the largest tree within view from that area of the street, and they determined that it should not be removed, and that is the recommendation to you.
Okay. Question to staff? All right. A motion? Go.
I move to concur with Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation for item D1 and 2 to deny the setback.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. And now we move on to item E, which is changes to the street tree master plan.
Chair Connor, this item has along with it a short PowerPoint presentation, but we might be going over for our next item. We can proceed if you like.
Okay, let's proceed.
Okay. Rules in place. The existing trees on site are fairly large liquid amber trees. On a tour of some challenges with the forestry section, our director Nancy Rapp was taken around to look at some of those challenges, and this is one of those sites. The trees are breaking up hardscapes all around them, and the space is much too small for their size. These trees are about half the size that they could be eventually, and Ms. Rapp asked us to look into interest in replacing these trees with another species. As part of that, before we go to the citizens on this street, we felt that it was appropriate to designate a new smaller species. The committee and staff determined that the appropriateness of this neighborhood, it would be appropriate to get another deciduous tree to get some fall color back in there for these losses, and recommend that the species be changed to Chinese pistache tree.
I would just add an additional comment because I know it's unusual for us to recommend the removal of apparently healthy trees. It is notable that there are 5 or 6.
There's 4 existing trees.
4 existing trees in the neighborhood. All of the neighbors, at least once they saw we were there, they came out and joined us, and they were all supportive of that effort. There's significant concern and past experience with dropping of limbs that's common with that variety of tree. And so they were very interested in pursuing how to have the trees removed, and that led to a discussion with staff on we need to start working in some of the areas of our community where we have trees that probably weren't the right tree to put into certain locations, and we really ought to be looking at that and talking about the right plan and the right way to address that, looking at the long-term health of the urban forest, and this is one of those situations.
I have a question. So then would we have a dedicated project to go in and fill in before we remove, or allow some growth before we remove the existing trees?
Chair Connor, we would approach these citizens and explain the desire to look at phasing these trees out, filling any current vacant spots. There's a couple of spots where we could possibly put in trees now, and over time phase these trees out.
Okay. Do we want to take these each separately, or do we want to take them as a packet?
We can keep going if you
Let's
decide.
keep going.
Okay.
We'll take them as a group.
E2, species change for 800 block of North Fall, Ontario. These existing trees are liquid amber trees as well. They are in, as you can see, small squares. These trees are currently 1/4 the height of their eventual size. There is a project proposed to come in and repair sidewalks in this area, and staff's concern is we will lose some of these trees due to the necessary root pruning for the sidewalks. Given the space available and the adjoining block that has designated albizia tree, we felt it was appropriate to continue that and to this section of street, and that is Street Advisory Committee and staff's recommendation at this site. Item E3 is the jacaranda trees we discussed before. There is quite a number of different trees in this area, and the Street Advisory Committee felt it was important for the community to continue some of that planting, which would be the purple leaf plum, and but wanted to not see a monoculture planted and felt that something else would be appropriate. Determined that given the size of the trees and the height of the wires, that Marina strawberry tree and purple leaf plum would both be appropriate species for this location. The recommendation is to adopt both trees as designated for this section of street.
Okay. Questions of staff? Okay. Looks good. Motion to change these 3 street trees.
I'd like to make the motion to concur with staff and change the street trees on the master plan, items E, 1, 2, and 3.
Second. A motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Danny. And that brings us to our next time certain, which is the item 8, Measure G, November 2008 Users Utility Tax Ballot Measure.
I'm pleased to introduce to you our City Finance Director, Bob Pearson, who will present the report on Measure G.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Again, I'm Bob Pearson, City Finance Director, and I want to start by thanking you for allowing me some time on your agenda today to talk about Measure G. And as you may or may not know by now, Measure G is a ballot measure that will appear on the November 4th ballot placed there by the City Council. The Council voted unanimously on July 1st to place Measure G on the ballot. And at the same time they did that, Council also directed staff to develop and disseminate a public information effort in order to try to educate the citizens and voters of Santa Barbara about the city's utility users tax and Measure G specifically, so that when people go to the polls on November 4th, hopefully they will feel like they have enough information to make up their minds whether they want to vote for or against Measure G. And so I'm here today as part of that public outreach effort. And want to talk just a few minutes about Measure G, of course, and then I'd be glad to answer any questions. So I'm going to start with a little background, start with an overview of the city's utility users tax. As part of Council's deliberation and consideration in deciding to put Measure G on the ballot, the city did conduct a citizen opinion survey, and one of the things that showed quite clearly was that among the community there was a fairly broad lack of understanding about the city's utility users tax in general, and certainly about the issues revolving around Measure G. So the city has had a utility users tax in place since 1970. It is a tax which provides funding for both the city's general fund and for the city's streets fund. And the general fund, of course, I think you're probably well aware of the fact that the general fund is what most citizens associate with local government. It's the tax-supported services such as public safety, police and fire, 911 communications. Parks and Recreation, Library Services, and of course in the Streets Fund, that's where we budget for and pay for the maintenance and repair and upkeep of the city's transportation infrastructure, streets, roads, etc. We're not alone in having a utility users tax. Over 150 cities and counties in the state of California have a utility users tax, or UUT. Our utility tax, as I mentioned, has been in place since 1970. It is a 6% tax levied on 6 different utilities. It's a consumer tax, so people see it on their individual utility bills every month. The 6% tax is levied on 6 utilities: water, electric, natural gas, refuse or trash service, cable TV, and telephone. And Measure G affects and concerns only those last 2, cable television and telephone. So how much money does the utility tax provide the city? Here is a breakdown of the actual utility tax revenue that we received in the most recently completed fiscal year, which, as you know, ended June 30th. This is arranged by the 6 different utilities that are taxed in descending order of the amount of revenue provided by each. And you can see that I have bolded the 2 that Measure G concerns, which is telecommunications at about $3.9 million and cable TV at about $1.25 million. In total, $13.1 million last fiscal year. That means just a little more than $6.5 million to the city's general fund and about $6.5 million to the city's streets fund. The 2 that are subject of Measure G I mentioned are telephone and cable TV. Those 2 combined total about $5.1 million. And again, as I said, half of that goes to support general fund activities and half of it to the streets fund. This is a look at the allocation of the Measure G revenue, the utility tax on cable TV and telephone for the current fiscal year. And you can see there's the bottom, the $5.1 million figure I just referenced. And there's half of it at the top going to the streets fund. And then the other half, as I mentioned, goes to the general fund. And what the rest of that table shows is the allocation of that utility tax revenue from telephone and cable TV among the general fund functional areas based strictly on an allocation as a percent of budget. So public safety, police and fire being roughly half of the general fund, they get roughly 25% of the overall money, half of the general fund's portion. Parks and Rec is 7%. And community development 5%, and the administrative departments are 7% as well for the general fund. So why Measure G and why now, and what does it do? Well, Measure G will, as I mentioned, affect both the telephone and cable TV portions of our utility tax. Really, the reason why Measure G is on the ballot this November is there are 2 reasons, both of which arise out of the fact that, as I mentioned, the utility tax ordinance dates from the 1970s. The second reason, which I'll talk about first, is, as we all know, that since the 1970s, technology has changed pretty dramatically, and our ordinance is really out of date at this time. And what we have is a situation where the reality of technology change has outstripped our ability of our 1970s ordinance to reflect that changing reality. The Measure G would modernize our utility tax ordinance for telecommunications and video services to recognize those changes in technology. That's really the second reason, however. The first reason, the most important reason, is because as a result of a change in federal tax law a couple years ago, specifically the overturning of the federal excise tax on telephone services, a number of California cities are currently being sued by the telephone companies, challenging the validity of their telephone utility tax. And that's important because we don't know what the outcome of that litigation will be. It's still pending. Even my lawyer doesn't know the outcome of that litigation or isn't predicting what the outcome will be. But with $4 million of utility tax revenue annually from our telephone portion of the tax, I think the council felt that in an abundance of caution, the best course of action would be to take an updated ordinance to the voters and ask them to consider approving it. And Measure G is that ordinance, and Measure G removes the potential legal exposure that we have as a result of this pending litigation. And I want to stress that we're not being sued by the telephone companies. Larger cities are, Los Angeles, Sacramento, among others. But clearly, if that litigation were to go against the cities, it would have potentially negative impacts on us in terms of the validity of our own telephone utility tax. And so that really is the number one reason why the City Council voted to put Measure G on the ballot in November, was to resolve that potential litigation risk by removing references in our ordinance to the federal excise tax, which, had, as I said, was overturned a couple years ago. As long as we were going to the voters to take care of that piece, the council wanted to submit to the voters a modernized ordinance that reflected current technology. And I'll give you just a couple quick examples of that. In the telephone side of the ordinance, some of you may have heard of a telephone service called Vonage. They're actually advertising fairly heavily on TV recently. It is telephone service like any other, in the sense that you have a handset, you pick it up, you get a dial tone, you punch in your party's number, and if you're lucky, they answer. The difference is the technology behind the scenes. Vonage is a service which takes your voice, digitizes it, ships that digital signal over the internet, and then delivers it at the other end. Whereas Verizon, which many of us still have, those of us who still have landlines, delivers your voice in an analog manner over a pair of twisted copper wires. Right now, under our current ordinance, because of the technology that Vonage uses, they fall outside the scope of our utility tax ordinance, even though it is telephone service. Verizon and their customers are within the scope of the ordinance. And so we really have a situation where technology is changing, and the same services that we have taxed for 40 years almost, since the 1970 application or introduction of this ordinance, are now at times, depending on the technology used to deliver those services, are falling outside the scope of the ordinance. So Measure G is a modern communications tax ordinance. It has modern definitions that are technology neutral, so that we tax telephone service now. If Measure G were to pass, we tax telephone service. But we would tax it regardless of the technology used to deliver it. That resolves an issue of tax equity, where all users and service suppliers are treated the same. Now, clearly the council recognized that when they modernized the ordinance, that we would in the end be taxing certain things that we currently do not tax. And the council's goal, and their stated goal, was that we want to raise the same amount of revenue that we raise now. They're not looking to raise new revenue. And so, recognizing that we would be indeed expanding the tax base if Measure G passes, the council voted to put Measure G on the ballot at a reduced rate, and to lower the rate from 6% to 5.75%. And based on the best professional estimates we could get, that would result in what we're calling revenue neutrality. That is, the city would end up with the same amount of revenue afterwards as we do now. This is the ballot language that will appear on the actual ballot when the voters step into the booths on November 4th. And I know you'll thank me for not reading the whole thing, but I'll just take a shot at the first line or so. It says, shall Santa Barbara adopt an ordinance reducing the telecommunication utility users tax from 6 to 5.75%? It goes on to list the services that are funded by the tax revenue. It says exempting low-income seniors. That's something that we currently already do with our utility tax ordinance, and Measure G would preserve that. Prohibiting a tax rate increase without voter approval. Requiring equal treatment of all taxpayers regardless of technology, annual audits, public review of expenditures, and local control of all revenue. So to summarize, as I mentioned, Measure G is a modern communications ordinance solving the litigation and technology risks that we currently face with our 1970s ordinance. It has modern definitions that are technology neutral and attempts to provide tax equity so that all users and service suppliers are treated the same. I mentioned that over 150 cities and counties in the state have a utility tax. This is not a problem that's unique to Santa Barbara. Many of the cities in the state have essentially the same ordinance language that we do. More than 26 California cities have already gone to their voters and asked for approval of a modern telecom UUT ordinance. And without exception, every single one of those 26 cities, their voters have approved those modernized ordinances, some with approval rates as high as 89%. The election is November 4th. Vote by mail begins in just a week or so, a couple weeks, October 6th. I know that in this room we're all already registered to vote, but if you know someone who isn't, they must do so by October 20th. And more information can be found on the city's website, right from the home page, including the ballot measure, which you just saw, the proposed detailed ordinance, the resolutions of council, and all the staff reports, arguments both for and against Measure G, including rebuttals of the arguments both for and against Measure G. How to get more information, there's links to on the web page, and all of the website materials are available in Spanish. I do just want to mention a couple things. I make this presentation now a number of times, and I get questions. There's two things I want to clarify. One is cell phones. I get questions. They say, Bob, you just want to tax my cell phone, and I kind of sheepishly say, well, I'm sorry, we already do, and have for almost 15 years now. So this is not about taxing cell phones. And the other thing I want to mention is internet service. Federal law currently prohibits local governments from levying local taxes on internet service. The amount of money that you pay to Verizon for your DSL service each month, excuse me, or the amount you pay Cox Communication for your internet access. Federal law currently prohibits local governments from taxing that amount, and we do not, of course. That federal law expires in 2014. The council wanted to make it clear that regardless of what federal law does in the future, that we will not tax internet access. So Measure G, the ordinance, is quite specific that we will not tax internet access. And that means whether that internet access is at your home, on your desktop or laptop computer, or whether you have a BlackBerry or an iPhone or other smartphone or just a cell phone with internet access, if it's a data plan, internet access, email, it will not be taxed, again, whether it's on a portable device, a handheld device, or on your computer. So I just wanted to add those two things because I get questions about them. That concludes my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Very informative. Questions?
Yes, ma'am. Just to be absolutely certain that I'm clear on the cell phones, the utility users tax has applied to cell phones for 15 years? Something like that. I didn't have.
Yes, something like that. Yes.
My cell phone bill, when I go home tonight and look at it, will have a city charge on it.
That's correct.
Okay. Will it then be reduced from 6% to 5 3/4?
Yes.
Okay. So, cell phone thing is fairly clear that we're already being taxed, and we're going to get this minuscule little reduction. Let's go to the number one thing. The risk, as you stated, is the risk of elimination of the tax. And that the federal law has been overturned, and telephone companies, you indicated, I think it's something more than telephone companies are fighting to have utility taxes. I know there are individuals and groups that are fighting around the state to have utility user taxes eliminated, not just phone companies that are doing it. But if it does not pass Measure G, and somebody does follow through with the elimination of the tax, then your taxes would actually be lowered on your cell phone, your regular phone, your water, etc.
No, that's only partially true, sir.
Okay.
Because you were right until you said water and other things.
Okay, it's not the 6 items you noted before.
No, the only piece of the utility tax that is being challenged around the state is the telephone piece alone.
Telephone only.
Yes. And to my knowledge, there are challenges from other than the telephone companies, but for the most part, to my knowledge, those other challenges, I'll give you an example. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is challenging the city of Sacramento's, but that's on a procedural issue, a Proposition 218 issue, where they're challenging and claiming that the city of Sacramento illegally expanded their tax without voter approval. And so if they were to prevail in that challenge, to my knowledge, Sacramento would be left with what they had before the alleged expansion. To my knowledge, it's the telephone companies that are challenging the entire tax, basically saying that our tax is based on the federal excise tax, which was overturned. But your point is absolutely right, that if Measure G fails, nothing happens and we're left with what we have. If the phone companies then prevail in the litigation, in all likelihood, we would lose $4 million a year of telephone utility tax, and customers' telephones, whether they be landline or cellular, would no longer be taxed.
Yeah.
If we're left in place, if Measure G fails, and the cities prevail in the litigation that the telephone companies have brought, then we would be left with what we have now, and we would be left with a 6% tax that would be continued to be applied to cellular and landline phones.
Right. You stated as we would be left with $4 million less in income. The other side of that, of course, is taxpayers would pay $4 million less in taxes.
Absolutely.
Just to
No, absolutely.
I sometimes get the view, and I've been reading a lot of the information that's come out, that there's more advocating for this going on than there should be, instead of the impartial. I know you're attempting, and you've done a pretty good job of giving an impartial presentation, but I just want to present a little of the other side. And my last question is, what percentage of the voters does it require for this Measure G to pass?
Majority.
50 plus 1?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Other questions, comments?
Question. You had some percentages on the different distribution of funds that are collected.
Yes, sir.
And the question is, how do you decide on different percentages that go to the different departments, and who decides on that?
Well, the percentages that I presented, as I mentioned, were the streets fund is 50%. That's the way it is. So that's just the way it's been since 1977, that half of our utility tax revenue goes to the streets fund and half of it goes to the general fund. So that's just set. The half that goes to the general fund is allocated in this table simply based on budget, because there is no specific allocation of the utility tax revenue within the general fund. It is just a general tax within the general fund. And so the only way to appropriately allocate it is to say we're going to allocate it based on budget, that since public safety is 50%, they're going to get 50% of the general fund share. Since Parks and Rec is 14% of the general fund, they're going to get 14% of the general fund's share. That's how this table here is allocated, just based on a percent of budget.
But who decides on the different percentages? Like who?
Well, the city council does.
That's our budget process.
It's the budget.
Budget recommended to the council.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Where we fight every year to get as much as we can for parks.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, I see this as an important modernization and support this strongly because of the revenue source to parks and libraries and all the things that make our city work. And also, I see it as a revenue source that's protected within the city and not able to be taken by the state, or some of our other sources are more vulnerable, and that's an important thing to protect what we have here, to have some local generation of funds. So I signed off on it and I support it strongly, so thank you very much. And I think the city walks a very fine line on this one. I think Mr. Pearson, you've presented both sides of it, and thank you, Mr. Fursell, for presenting the other side there strongly. But who else is going to go out and talk about this? Nobody's going to talk about it otherwise, and then people don't know what they're voting on, and that's a tough one. So I think there is a responsibility to educate. So thank you very much.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Gonzalez, one additional comment because the commission is so familiar with our budget. Our urban forestry program, the 50% of the UUT, which was designated to streets, also funds about 80% or more of our urban forestry program. So Those are two different funds. We didn't go into that level of complexity, just for the general public, but because you are familiar with our budget, you would know that that is how our urban forestry program is funded.
Thank you. I think we're going to take about a 5-minute, 10-minute break and then come back for our last, it'll still be about our last item on the agenda.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, we have two items. One is very brief, but yes, the one item remaining that is substantial is the commercial activities in parks. And if we could remind speakers, if you wish to speak, please fill out a white speaker slip in the back and write the agenda number 6 on it. And if you'll hand that in, then we'll have speakers as part of public comment for the item.
We'll take a brief break. going to call the meeting back to order, and we will note that Commissioner Connor had to leave for another meeting, so we have 3. And the next item of business is commercial activities in park. Ms. Rapp.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, tonight will be the start of a discussion that we anticipate will continue into your next meeting. I wanted to give a preface before staff gives their report. As all of you know, our parks are highly valued by members of the community. They're a venue for a whole variety of activities, from family picnics to company parties to events and sports and people who walk or stroll and running and et cetera. And our responsibility is to manage our parks for an appropriate balance of those activities so that our parks serve the community. From time to time, we have issues that come up from both neighbors and park users related to a particular park, activities in a particular park, and I would say that we're more commonly, more frequently in the last 2 years or so been getting more comments about conflicts and questioning of some of the ways that we've been managing our parks different from how we did before. So tonight, our focus is primarily on the scope of commercial activities in city parks and beaches, and it comes to you from complaints, concerns, and changes in how the park has been used, primarily at Shoreline Park. And I would say probably over the last 2-3 years, we've had an increase in complaints from Shoreline Park neighbors about a number of issues, from squirrels to bikes in the park, skateboarding in the park, trying to think of all the different things that have been an issue. We've had emails, we've had letters, we've had correspondence that has gone to mayor and council about some of these issues that has then been forwarded down to the department. And within the last year and a half or so, we've had more comments from neighbors and park users about the increase in a particular kind of activity, which has been taking place primarily in Shoreline Park, but also in other parts of the city, as we've been noting as we make our way around to the different parks. And that is that there's a new fitness trend. You'll hear more about this, of just taking the workout outdoors. It's a wonderful thing because it's a program that engages people in physical activity, and that's really what we support and really want people to be more physically active and engaged in that, and parks are a wonderful place for that activity to take place. But it's a new use that has been expanding and has drawn criticism and concerns from both neighbors and park users about the frequency of those activities taking place in the park, how those activities interact with others in the park, questions about the fact that they are commercial businesses operating in the park, and of course that requires a city permit. So what we are bringing to you, and you had a number of people come and speak to you at your September commission meeting about this, and so our focus today is very specific, even though there are other park user issues that have been brought to us over time. The focus today is specifically on commercial activities in city parks, and we'll be offering to you some options for your consideration. I think it's very important to frame this in that largely the Parks and Recreation staff, and I'm going to say very specifically Susan Bardick, who's here to make the presentation today, and Judith Cook and myself, have spent a good portion of our jobs on a regular basis, year in and year out, weighing that appropriate balance in our parks and facilities. So this focus on this particular activity for us is not really any different than how we consider how many activities of any one type are held in any one location. For instance, several years ago, there was a significant influx of activities that were scheduled down in the waterfront area, and that resulted in a policy adopted by City Council for how many activities could be scheduled down there, how frequently, during what months. Similarly, we have policies for the kinds of activities, the frequency of activities that take place in De La Guerra Plaza. And similarly, we have restrictions in some of our parks for certain kinds of activities, whether it be organized sports practice, whether it be alcohol, whether it is the use of amplified sound. All of these issues are commonly dealt with us on a daily basis, achieving that balance so that our parks are welcoming for the majority of our park users at any one time. So our intent tonight is to do a staff report, provide you with some information and background. What we learned is that this is not a trend only affecting Santa Barbara. Agencies throughout the state and across the country are dealing with this in their parks. So we're going to share with you what some of the other communities are doing. So the staff will give their report, and then if we'll address any questions that the commission has on the report. Our recommendation is that you then go to public comment, and then once public comment is closed, that the commission have their discussion and provide direction to staff for what you would like to have us come back to you with. And I would anticipate that we would return in October, depending, on what that direction is. And I also wanted to mention that we did extensive outreach for this meeting tonight. We walked the neighborhood and distributed flyers. We tried to contact via email people who had emailed us recently about this issue and let them know that this item was on the agenda. And we received a number, and I encouraged people who couldn't be here to submit their email correspondence, of which you have a packet. And I don't know how much time you'll have to review that prior to the meeting, since you didn't get it until today. But certainly can be taken into consideration for your deliberation. But I look forward to answering any questions that you have following the staff report. As I mentioned, Susan Jang Bardick, who is our Event and Facilities Coordinator, and I think she actually has a different title now, but I'm blanking on it. But Susan has the primary responsibility of permitting activities that take place in our parks. She's our lead on enforcing policies that are set by the City Council and the City Administration and our department for those activities. And Judith Cook, who is the manager of the Cultural Arts section and the Recreation manager that oversees the work that Susan does in our parks. So with that, I'll defer to Susan Bardick.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Longstreet, Commissioners. I'm Susan Jang Bardick. I'm the Facilities and Special Events Supervisor. Tonight I'm here to bring you a report about options on regulating commercial activities. Back in July, the department had reported an increase in commercial activities, mainly fitness classes in Shoreline Park. At that meeting, you also heard from members of those fitness classes who were voicing concerns about their classes being denied a permit for Shoreline Park. As Nancy was saying, there's a hot new trend in exercise nowadays, and that is fitness classes moving away from the indoor gym to an outdoor location. Many of these fitness classes are called boot camps, since they're designed to get you fit in 6 to 8 weeks. Participants can generally take part in these fitness classes 2 to 5 times per week between the morning hours of 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and the afternoon hours of 5 to 8 p.m. Classes generally have about 6 to 15 people in them. As Nancy was saying, while the department does support the public getting fit and healthy, these activities present challenges to us. We've discovered that many of these programs are conducted without a permit. I do want to go on the record that this photo that we have here on this slide is of Booty Camp Santa Barbara, and they have always gotten a permit for us. Fitness trainers and companies seem to always want the same prime location, and that significantly affects one park, and that then interferes with other park uses, such as walkers, runners, moms with strollers, and rentals. City regulations has a municipal code in place, section 15.16.010, which requires any person practicing, carrying on, conducting, or soliciting for any occupation, business, or profession in any city park or beach to have a business license and a permit with the city. Since 2005, fiscal year 2005, we do have a fee structure in place for what we call multi-session classes and activities, whether it's a social class, such as a club's folk dance class, or whether it's a commercial activity where payment is required to participate. In the past, we've issued park permits for classes such as yoga, tai chi, dog agility, day camps, and surf camps. Initially, when these fitness classes started popping up in specifically Shoreline Park, the department took a soft approach to try to rein in these commercial activities. We informed these groups that we saw about the law, and we explained to them that without a permit, that taxpayers were in essence subsidizing their business. Some obtained the permit, but many have avoided us. Of the 10 or so commercial activities operating in city parks and beaches now, only about 5 of them have obtained a park permit. And we have issued, and in the past we issued 3 permits to 3 different fitness groups in Shoreline Park, with the others flying under the radar. What we ended up with is both permitted and unpermitted fitness classes overwhelming Shoreline Park, since these classes were in the park as many times as 4 to 6 hours per day. Some of the issues that got brought to the department's attention at various meetings that Nancy had talked about related to other issues were that these types of classes really had increased in the park, and it was beginning to make the park look like a gym. And they were questioning whether these commercial activities were even appropriate in a public park already heavily used by others. So now we've got issues that we need to address, and of course regulation that needs to be in some new definitive policy in order to manage these commercial activities and provide that balance that Nancy was talking about. Our new definitive policy would designate specific locations within a park or beach for the commercial activities. We would also specify requirements for the commercial activities in order to lessen their impacts to scheduled park activities, park rentals, and the drop-in users. We would limit the frequency of them. And of course, for the high demand locations, we've got to be this policy has to be fair and allow all businesses an equal opportunity to those high demand locations. At the same time, we think it's time for us to review our current fee structure for use of public property for private gain. Currently, since fiscal year 2005, residents who are doing commercial activities pay $15 an hour, and if you're a non-resident, in other words, you live outside of the city limits, you pay $18 an hour. Just to give you a little bit of reference, the department charges $11 an hour for a tennis instructor to conduct a private lesson, a one-on-one lesson on a city tennis court. And we also charge $41 if you want to rent out a dance studio at Carrillo Recreation Center for a dance class. So, of course, in our research, we wanted to look at what other cities were doing, and we did discover that they also are experiencing an increase in commercial activities in their parks and beaches. The city of Ventura and Thousand Oaks, for example, charges $25 per hour for commercial activities, and for Ventura, they actually limit activities to non-neighborhood parks. On a local level, Santa Barbara City College is experiencing the same increase in fitness classes, and they are looking towards the city to see what policy we put in place and what fees we end up charging, because they are thinking about modeling their policy after ours, because these fitness classes have affected a lot of scheduled activities already taking place in La Playa Stadium. In the cities of Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, Long Beach, and Newport Beach, commercial activities are only offered by independent contractors who are contracted by their city's Parks and Recreation Department, with the city retaining 30 to 40% of the fees. In the city of Santa Cruz, if a commercial activity takes place in a beach location, the person pays $500 a year. If the commercial activity takes place in a park location, the person pays 10% of the gross sales, and this is all done on the honor system with the vendor completing a quarterly sales report. In the city of Encinitas, which is located in northern San Diego County, they're currently looking at developing regulations for the dozen or so surf camps that have cropped up in their beaches, because the nearby cities, San Diego, Del Mar, Solana Beach, have tightened their regulations on commercial activities. And of course, with the influx of all the surf camps, that has truly impacted the general user who wants to use their beaches. Staff had recommended approval of a vendor license option for the surf camps, but the City Council has requested that they come back with more additional options. Based on the research that we did with the other cities and what we have done as a department, we are presenting 3 options tonight for regulating commercial activities. I'm going to mention what the 3 options are now, and then I'm going to go into detail about them. Option 1 is a comprehensive commercial activities policy with new limitations and a lottery system. Option 2 is an independent contractor status, and option 3 are vendor licenses. Option 1, which is a comprehensive commercial activities policy with new limitations and a lottery system, this policy would address the number of classes allowed per day. The policy would indicate how large the class could be, what hours a particular location could be used for commercial activities, and we would also designate locations where classes could be held. Knowing that certain parks would be more desirable than others, we would develop a lottery system to give all businesses a fair and equal opportunity for the high-demand locations. I do want you to note that with this option, it is more labor-intensive for staff on an ongoing basis, and with the current fee structure in place, it would not cover the increased staff time needed for this lottery system. Option 2 is the independent contractor status, where interested instructors and businesses would become city independent contractors. The city would market the classes through our activity guide. We would register participants in the classes, and we would collect the fees. And then the city would share the total revenue with the contractor. The department already has a variety of contract classes that we offer: dance classes, dog obedience, yoga, tennis, beach volleyball, ceramics, etc. And with these independent contractor agreements, generally the instructor receives 65% of the total revenue and the department receives 35%. I do want to say that with this particular option, that procedures are already in place for us to register as we've done with the other classes, and so we do not see a significant increase in the workload. However, I do have to say that those people not interested in this arrangement would need to find other non-city locations. Option number 3 is vendor licenses, where we would issue a vendor license at specific park locations. First of all, we would identify which park locations we would set up concessions at. We would set terms and conditions for that commercial activity, and we would issue a request for proposal, and the person who was awarded, who was basically the highest bidder, would be awarded the concession at that particular park site. And of course, the licensing contract would specify all the requirements that we would have, the locations that people could be in, what the payment plan would be, and the length of the contract, etc. Our department currently has 2 concessions, 2 vendor licenses at East and West Beach. One is a kayak vendor and one is a outrigger vendor. I do have, for this particular option, this would provide the department the greatest amount of revenue with the least amount of workload, given that the bid process would be conducted annually. Now that I presented the 3 options, any new option and subsequent policy, of course, enforcement will be key. Currently, we have not taken a hard approach to unpermitted activities, nor have we shut any of them down. But with this new policy, we would be ramping up the monitoring and enforcement efforts by our park monitors and our park rangers. We would give 1 verbal warning to the groups who don't have permits, and thereafter, if we find them in our parks, we would be issuing citations. This particular slide shows what the citation amounts are for the first, second, and third offense. Knowing that it's going to take us some time to develop this new policy, we've put an interim policy in place. Currently, we've put a moratorium on issuing any commercial activity permits at Shoreline Park. And when we have issued new permits for other parks, we've been only issuing them for 60 days at a time on a first-come, first-served basis. We're also, before we even issue the permit, we are also looking at park locations and looking at the current park activities, park rentals, and drop-in uses, so we don't move the problem that we've had at Shoreline Park to another park. And we're also requiring that the businesses display their permits, so if someone from the public wants to see whether they've got a permit or not, they can tell immediately. While we are looking for you commissioners to provide direction to staff on a plan of action, the department recommends that you consider a combination of options 1 and 3. And we would also make sure that the new policy would develop appropriate policy guidelines. We would develop a lottery drawing for park locations where maybe we didn't have the vendor license option. And for the park locations where we would have the vendor license option, we would establish 2 to 3 specific locations, probably in Shoreline Park and potentially in La Mesa Park, which is our second most popular park for fitness classes. And we would be looking at revising our fee structure to better reflect the use of public property for private gain. That's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
public speak?
Yeah, if you have questions of staff right now, we can ask questions, and we're going to do public speakers, and then we will have our discussion. So any questions at this time?
Well, I have a number, but I have one I wanted to ask you right away. You just mentioned that some have moved over to La Mesa. Have we had any complaints? I know there aren't many neighbors there because it's commercial across the street, commercial to the side, military here, and in back you've got to go over the bridge. Is there anybody complaining about the noise at La Mesa?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Fursell, we have not received any complaints. Right now, we only have one permitted fitness class in La Mesa.
It seems that area is segregated enough and separated enough from residential things that we wouldn't get some of the complaints that we've gotten in the sheet you gave us today about neighbors with people waking them up at 6 in the morning to start, because really there aren't any houses unless you go over to Camino de la Luz. That would be the next street over that you could go to where there would actually be any houses. So,
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Forcell, just for your information, in the past we have received complaints from those bordering residential complexes when we have had like a dog obedience class that started early in the morning on a Saturday or a Sunday. So in the past we have had complaints about park activity that takes place early in the morning, but we have not had anything recently.
okay. Madam Chair, did you want to?
We will start the public hearing. If you'll notice on the podium, there's a clock, and it is set for 2 minutes. We would like everyone to keep it to 2 minutes. If basically what you have to say mirrors what someone else said, you can just say, I agree. You know, you don't have to repeat everything if you don't want to. We will call your name and the person behind you, and if you can move up to the front, it makes it go a little bit faster.
Okay, and excuse me in advance if I mispronounce your name, but the first speaker is going to be Rick Barber, followed by Eric Havlebal.
And if you would just state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Rick Barber. I live on 2434 Borton on the Mesa. And I would like to address, I am part of the Tai Chi group that we do meet regularly on Saturday mornings at La Mesa Park. And I also use La Mesa Park regularly during the week. I consider it a neighborhood park. I'm there quite often in the morning. I get to go there before work. And a lot of times, you see the same people there. A lot of neighbors come across the bridge. People come down from Lazy Acres and Blenders and eat their lunch there and breakfast and have coffee, and they put blankets down and use the park. And recently, along with everyone else, the character of the park has been changing with the activity, and the level of activity has been encroaching, I believe, on the use of the park for everyone else. The compatibility is kind of tough when there's a large group there using the whole park. There's one group that I've been there and I've had to leave because they use the lower grassy area, the higher grassy area, the parking lot, the sidewalk, and they do tours around the park, and that makes it hard for everyone else. And so I would ask you to take that into consideration. Some of us do consider La Mesa Park our neighborhood park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Eric, followed by Robert Grayson Grivalba.
Good evening. My name is Eric Fallball, and I'm an attorney at Price Postell in Parma, here this afternoon or this evening for the Body Boot Camp of Santa Barbara. And following me, Mr. Grayson Grijalva who's the owner of the business, will discuss more about the details of his outdoor fitness program, which has operated for almost 5 years here. And what he has asked us to do is to help them ensure that the process is fair, both in adopting the rules, also how the rules are implemented and what the rules say themselves. I just have 3 points for that. The first is they were disappointed when the city did not renew the permit that they had for Shoreline Park, while allowing a different boot camp to continue at Shoreline Park. And one of the concerns there is that the other camp, the booty camp, is limited to women. And my understanding is that businesses are not allowed to discriminate in the state of California on the basis of sex. So one of the suggestions that we have for the policies that the staff's going to develop is that the city require a certification that the businesses don't discriminate illegally in the offering of their services. The second thing in the rules is we would like to see a policy, one of the policies developed in a appeal process to the director or to the commission for permits that are denied or not renewed. And then last, we want to ask that you carefully consider option number 1 as being the most fair and the most equitable, so that there would be a lottery, everybody would be able to file an application, there'd be more availability, more equality in the option 1 that the staff has outlined as opposed to options 2 and 3, and we hope that you'll consider that very carefully. Thank you very much.
Good timing there, 2 minutes.
Very good. Okay.
You're next.
That's Robert next, followed by Timothy Harding.
I'll try to be just quick. I wish I had a PowerPoint presentation. Those were so good. You guys met me the last time I was here 2 months ago, and I'm here today as the owner of Body Boot Camp of Santa Barbara, and as he said, we've been in business for nearly 5 years. And I'm here just so that we can participate in this process to create new guidelines for commercial use of the city parks and beaches. And the proposals that you're currently reviewing don't actually take into consideration the unique way that our program works. So I just wanted to take a minute to tell you how our program works. Ours is unique because we keep it very, very small, to 10 people or less, so we can give them personalized attention. And our workouts are varied every single day, which is why Shoreline is a really good place for us to meet. We don't always use Shoreline, but we like to meet there in the parking lot. Well, we used to. We have moved to La Mesa. But at Shoreline, we could very easily take our group down to the beach or take them on a run along the path or do a number of things that would not necessarily use the park, and then often we would use the park, which made Shoreline an excellent choice for us. I understand that your goal today is to create policies that will work for all the vendors, for the city staff, and the general public that accesses the park. Of the 3 proposals before you, as you were just told, number 1 we think is the most fair, and we hope that you will consider doing something along those lines. Number 2, from our perspective, would probably put us out of business because we wouldn't be able to continue to pay our coaches at the level that we do now, and so we would have nobody working for us. And number 3 is the one that's most concerning to me because I feel like it caters specifically to those businesses that can afford to bid on that process, and then once that process is over, it locks it out for 12 months, meaning we can't participate again in that process for 12 months, essentially putting us out of business, and no new businesses entering the market, we think, which is a good thing because we're all about health lifestyles, could never enter the market for 12 months until that process was opened again. So I've outlined all of my concerns to the proposals that were put together, and I'm going to leave them for you because I don't have enough time to tell you everything. But I hope that you will certainly read this and take these into consideration during this process. Thank you so much.
I'm Timothy Harding. I'm part of the leadership of the Marine Terrace Neighborhood Association and the former coordinator of the Mesa Shoreline Park Association. A number of our neighbors and members have brought to our attention and asked me to talk about the designation of Shoreline Park as a kind of passive recreation area versus the active sport activities that some other parks permit, and they're complaining of the increased intensity of this kind of organized activity, and they put it in the following context. A big section of our park fell into the ocean. We still have a temporary fence which the Parks Department is paying rental on for so many months when they could have put in by now a permanent fence. We had a meeting last spring with the Parks Department in the park about this situation, and we heard that they were having trouble getting money for the geologist to analyze the situation and to come up with a plan with an engineer. And so the context here is organized activities not paying and lack of funds to do what needs to be done to bring the park back. And it isn't only the collapse in the fence, it's also that the park is looking ratty these days because so many sections have dried out, the sprinklers aren't covering properly. And so clearly there's a lack of resources. And if there's a lack of resources, we need to have revenue. So our members are divided about how many of these organized activities they want or don't want, and how it changes the character of the park. But the main thing is that those activities, if they are going to go on, should finance the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the park.
Thank you.
Okay, Craig Guy is next, followed by Mike Larbig.
Hello, my name is Craig Guy. My wife and I, we own a house on Marine Terrace, and so basically we've had some meetings about this in the park, and so I'm here today to just tell you, over the last year I've seen a dramatic increase in the number of personal trainers setting up shop at Shoreline. I feel like it's getting out of hand and we need some limits. The fact that the city of Ventura has banned this use from our neighborhood parks, just like Shoreline entirely, is something that I'm in preference of. Of course, the likelihood that the City Council will allow this is a great reality, and we need to think about the residents of that with the traffic, the noise, the hundreds of car trips a week there. So I would like to say that we got to be realistic about this process. These guys are making good money out of this, and I think the city should try to maximize the revenue by setting up a bidding process broken down by location and time. And we put a strict number of permits and time of use things on them. Sorry, a little nervous.
It's okay.
Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike is next, followed by Karen Monson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Larbig, and I live on San Nicolas, which is the street that kind of bisects the center of Shoreline Park. My wife and two kids and I have lived there together for 13 years, and I've lived in that neighborhood for about 25 years. Over the course of that time, I've seen a slow change in the types of use in that park. While I was sitting here waiting, listening to everybody, I counted the number of school-aged kids on our street right now, and there's 20. So the neighborhood's kind of changing from a lot of the original owners into a lot of young families who've been able to live there. And a lot of those kids and elderly people, too, go down into that park. I go into the park every day, and as do my wife and oftentimes my kids. And what's happening is the neighborhood character of that park, like the gentleman who referred to La Mesa Park, is changing because of this type of commercial activity. And I would urge you to designate, in whatever you do with regulations, designate neighborhood parks to eliminate that commercial activity. Some of the photos in the slides have shown, the density of the people that are on the path. A lot of elderly people walk up there and sit on the benches, and I've been on my way out of town at 6 in the morning and seen the meeting down there, and the noise is, it's significant. There's free parking for the groups that meet there, and the rent is essentially free. So if you do consider the costs or the charges that you're going to impact these people, you really got to get it closer to what the market would be. But mostly, like the city of Ventura and their ordinance, in that they've designated neighborhood parks as off limits for commercial activities. That would be my hope. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's Karen, followed by Karen, who's going to do something for David.
Thank you. I'll speak for David first. I have a written statement from David Barton, who's been the Tai Chi teacher in Santa Barbara for well over 20 years. My name is David Barton. I have taught Tai Chi at La Mesa Park for at least 10 years. When I first started there...
Can you pull the mic down?
Oh, I'm
just-
sorry.
There you go.
Okay. When I first started there, I asked Parks and Rec about reserving the space and was told at that time that I could pay a fee that was considerably higher per time than offered now, but that if I chose, I could use it for free without a reservation and take my chances and move if others reserved it occasionally. I did this, and it has worked out fine for years. When an article appeared in the news press about my class, I was contacted by Parks and Rec and told that the policy has changed and that I would now need to pay for any use involving collection of money. I went along with this and paid and got insurance. Now I'm told that I must compete with others for the use of this space with no guarantee beyond 3 months. My class depends upon consistency, and I cannot run a business by rolling the dice every 3 months to find out where the class will go next. I have begun the search for a new dependable location, as I have little confidence that this will be resolved favorably. Since the park is large and we require no more than 2,000 square feet, and there would seem to be many possible time and space sharing configurations available, perhaps more area divisions could accommodate several groups simultaneously. Our group is an ongoing and year-round and cannot tolerate the type of uncertainty that has been presented to me at this point. I feel that I've been penalized for going along with Parks and Recs, and that more equitable arrangement could be devised without sacrificing fairness to new applicants. That's David's statement. What I'd like to say personally, as a student of his for over 20 years in this town and in that park for 10 years, we meet at 10 o'clock Saturday mornings. To my knowledge, I've never experienced any complaints regarding our group and how we impact it. In that amount of time, once or twice I can remember having to move because another group wanted the space, and that was an agility dog situation, and we just accommodated by moving from where we normally practice to somewhere else. My concern is, as I listen to what's going on here, is that there's this change that's occurring with a new kind of group that's, coming about, and that big rules will be implemented that affect people that have been around doing compatible park activity for many years. So I ask you to take that into consideration, that any kind of agreement that's made in the end of all this, that you take into consideration that there are other legal uses and paying uses that don't maybe impact the area quite as much as, the one that's being brought to your attention now. So, thank you. And
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Stacy Cooper, followed by, and we got to get our writing better here, Krister Kallai.
Hi, my name is Stacy Cooper, and I'm the owner of Booty Camp SB, and I want to start off by saying I'm kind of open to a lot of the options. I want to create a mutually beneficial relationship and a way to coexist. Believe it or not, I didn't get into this for the money. I was a busy trainer and started doing groups outside because of that. And I hope to be a major philanthropic force in the community in probably, hopefully, a few years. So my ultimate goal is to change lives and create a happy, healthy community. I started the business and took all appropriate actions, and I was in compliance with all city ordinance. I applied for ongoing contracts from day one, whether there were 2 people there or whether there was no one. Currently, I generate substantial ongoing revenue for the parks, probably about $1,000 a month that I pay. We can go somewhere else. I think people come for myself, the instructors, the culture we've created, but I'd love to stay. It's not about Shoreline to us. If the issue is Shoreline, open to going other places. We're currently at Alameda. I don't know if there's been complaints there. I'm open to going there. As far as the intense competition that's being talked about and the favoritism spoken about in print or otherwise, it's in reference to the ongoing contracts. Basically, the people that have been in operation for 5 years or so have been operating illegally. And now that they're being forced to operate legally, because they now go to get a permit of a space that I already had, now there's creating this environment where, oh gosh, I have to actually operate legally and ethically and pay for a permit. And that's what's creating this situation. But we can go somewhere else, so I'm open to talking about the options. the lottery, that main issue is why should I have to go into a fight with people who have operated illegally for years, literally years, paying for permits and saying that favoritism, I just think it's pretty ludicrous. But as far as the independent contractor or percent of sales, I'm open to that. I think I'm potentially one of your best moneymakers if we can figure out a way to coexist together. Out of the gate, I've done this from day one the right way, so I'd kind of like to really kind of keep it going. I think we have a really, really good thing going as far as what we're creating with the women. As far as women-owned businesses, I'm confused a little bit about, I mean, we have Women's Athletic Club, we have Curves, but, you know, we can talk about that stuff. For me, I just think that, you know, why should we cause, in option number one, the city to pay more money for staff to create this lottery situation, which, again, is probably not going to work the best marketing-wise. How do we tell people where our boot camps are? How do we, you know, explain, do we change week to week? The bidding, again, would probably get a little bit expensive, too, and probably put us out of business. So,
okay.
Just want a way to coexist together. Sorry, I went over time a little bit.
It's okay.
Okay, thank you. Next was, was it Kristen? All right, Kristen. And the next one is Cassandra. Girls, we've got to get some handwriting stuff going on here.
Sorry about the handwriting. I'm just here to support Booty Camp. Basically,
could you say your name for the record?
Kristen Kalai.
Kalai, okay.
I just moved to Santa Barbara actually recently, about 6 months ago, from the Bay Area. And I thought how unique and how wonderful this area is to let the residents enjoy and truly use the parks. I chose Stacy's Boot Camp because it was operating legally with a permit, and I knew that she was following all the rules, and there was no risk of us getting shut down, so I knew my money was going to the right place. I just hope that we can all learn to share, just something that I learned a long time ago. And Shoreline was great, but I do know that the residents there really value their view and their space, and I just hope that you guys don't put her out of business or any other boot camp for that, because she's been great and a great addition to your community. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, that'll be Cassandra, then followed by Emily Draws.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Fieldy, and I am a local business owner, women-owned electrical contractor. We've been in business for 50 years. We do pay for permits as well to work for the city. So I don't think that it's too much to ask for the businesses, the boot camps, to pay for permits to work in the park. There are women-owned businesses. I belong to the National Women's Business Association. The NAWBO has a chapter in Santa Barbara that meets monthly and is all women. I also belong to the Coastal Women community, and they're all women, so that's kind of a little out the door. I don't know the difference, and maybe the commission can explain neighborhood parks versus non-neighborhood parks. I'm not aware of the difference, but I'm open to parking anywhere. I've worked out personally with Stacy for over a year, and she's been a really great addition to my life and to my husband's life, so I know a lot of our friends go to her, and like she said, she's gotten busy and has done these boot camps as a result of that. So she is ethical, and as a business owner myself, I look to do business with other business owners that follow the same procedures.
Thank you.
And as far as designation on beaches, I know that dogs have their own area and can coexist in different parks and stuff, and I don't see why businesses can do the other thing. The bidding is a little eccentric. I know as a business owner with my company, that would be difficult for any business to go into the highest bidding war and then wouldn't be able to again, apply for that job for another year. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then that'll be Emily, followed by Nancy Patterson. Excuse me? They both left. Then we'll move to, I'm not even going to try the first name, Rutenberg. What is your first name?
Liat Rutenberg.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Before I talk about what I wanted to speak about. I wanted to address the comment about the all-women's boot camp. There's a lot of hype about it and a lot of excitement, and quite a few people are attending that. And so I'd like to mention that it's obviously meeting a need in this city, and for you to consider that when you're considering that notion. Anyway, I'm here to speak in defense of commercial activities in parks in general, but most specifically of Booty Camp SB and I guess about Shoreline Park, although Stacy is right that she's got quite a following. The women in that class love her, and we will go to wherever park we're designated. But Santa Barbara is Santa Barbara, and sort of the pinnacle of that is enjoying outdoors by the seaside, and it's a fantastic place to work out. I think Shoreline Park is a privilege of all residents to enjoy, not just those that live around there. And I'd like the council to consider that the park is not part of those residents' gated community. So I think it's fine for people to show up for an hour, work out, and then leave and have other people maybe show up. I also wanted to say that we do tend to stay within the grassy area, and perhaps we happen to jog or do something on the pathway, but only momentarily, and that would be just like moving aside for another stroller or another walker. It's really not very time consuming in that part. I would like the committee to recognize that Stacy Booty Camp has been doing this correctly from the start, and that if there is some sort of lottery system that she be grandfathered in if possible, because while other people were not taking seriously the permitted version, the permitted aspect, Stacy always took care of that and was sure to tell us about that, and that was part of the perks. I wanted to mention, too, that I've been out there on many Saturday mornings at Shoreline Park, and we've had bypassers stop and comment about their enjoyment of the class, and people really seem to appreciate us out there. So just wanted to let you know that not everybody seems to be opposed to it.
To wrap it up.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Vance Sacco. Vance. And then that's followed by Jen Sacco. Am I close?
You did excellent.
All right,
far
thank
better
you.
than most
Appreciate
people are able to
that.
accomplish. I guess I can be very brief, and I can just sum this. I guess what troubles me the most, and I guess you should know, I have a vested interest in the booty camp, one of the booty camps, because my spouse is now working for the booty camps. So that's basically going to be half our income is, she's working for a small business. So your decision here as to your options is going to directly affect a small business like this, and it's going to have a large impact on me. But what I'd like to respond most to, I guess what bothers me most is the comments from the neighbors. It doesn't seem that the problem they have is with the noise. It has to do with the aesthetics, how it looks, how it's changing the former character of the park from maybe people strolling and playing checkers to actually doing something physical that's good for them. I think that if you live near a park, you put up with what goes on in the park. It's a public park. These are public activities. These are fitness activities. They're not gang activities. They're not alcohol-related activities. I live right across from West Beach, and I guarantee you that nobody that lives near the Mesa or Alameda has to put up with the amount of stuff that we put up, and we can put up with, and we can go right back to the West Beach concert, 2.5 days of nonstop, 10 to 12 hours pounding and bass music throughout our apartment. No parking available because people come and they park in the neighborhood. We only have street parking, so we can't park anywhere. They get ticketed, but that doesn't create any spaces because they don't tow the cars. So I think an activity like this really has a neighbor's complaint for something like this just should carry, it should be heard obviously, but should carry very little weight as to the impact of these programs.
Thank you. Is our last speaker?
Yes, that'd be Jen.
Wrapping it up. I just appreciate what's being done here, both between...
Your name?
It's Jen Sacco. Between the parts and Rex and what they're trying to establish, because we as neighbors, and my husband mentioned, we do live near West Beach where there is activities, and so you recognize that and appreciate the city for certain intermittent times when that is done, and then they take it away and life goes on. Same thing for Shoreline and stuff. They do live near a park. There are going to be activities, and I think these outdoor boot camps are really important. I think they've done great things for the health of a lot of citizens here, and so I think they should be foregoing. But I also think that maybe we need to find a way to regulate it. But people that have done that and worked with the Parks and Rec and followed those guidelines, I think they should be honored, and I think that should be recognized and taken into consideration. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, that completes comment.
That completes our public comment. I will close the public hearing and take it back to the commission for discussion and questions.
Would you like
Comments?
me to start, Madam Chair?
Sure.
You're not going to be my foil on this, are you?
Who knows? Let's hear what you say.
All right. Let's start with, I've been a small businessman for well over 30 years, so I have a lot of sympathy and want to, first of all, see small businesses succeed. So however we structure this, I don't want to be running small businesses, out of business because our fees are too high, which leads to option 2, and if I have misunderstood this, ladies, please let me know. But isn't option 2 require that 55% of the we'll handle the registration and all of the other, 55% of the money will go to them and 35% will be overhead coming to the Parks and Rec? Is that the correct breakdown for option 2?
65-35.
55?
65.
35, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 100%, would we?
I guess unless that 10% goes to you.
No, that's never hasn't happened in 6 years. I doubt it's going to happen now. That is doesn't seem workable to me. As a small businessman, if I had that kind of an overhead, that big a chunk taken out of my gross receipts, that just doesn't seem workable. And a couple people have alluded to that this would drive them out of business. So unless something was structured where they weren't paying that big a fee and that big a percentage, option 2 doesn't seem very workable to me. And also, if as it has been portrayed that there are between 6 and 15 people in most of these boot camps, that can't be a lot of money coming in. Call it 10 people. I'm not going to even speculate about what you charge per hour, but I don't think that's a lot of money. So I don't think anybody is getting rich on this. And if you take away 35% of what they're getting as gross, that doesn't seem like you can run a small business that way. Also, we need to make a distinction, and we got a lot of notes that I've been reading over during the meeting from that you passed to us as we began from people in the area. And one of their big concerns was the noise, the time that things started, and that. And I know the letter. I was listening intently to the letter from David Barton because I know him. He's an icon of the Tai Chi community in Santa Barbara. I've known him for 30 years. And very responsible guy. And the difference between a Tai Chi class at 10 o'clock on Saturday, with the motion and things going on, is one thing. The other, and I will be the first to say I have not been to the boot camps to see what they're like, although I may drop in at some time just to observe them. But, different things starting at 6 in the morning, and the image that comes to mind of a boot camp, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is a drill sergeant yelling at their charges, let's get this going, let's do this, Okay, I see a lot of head shaking, so I may well be wrong and have to go. But it just seems to me as though there certainly would be some distinction between, Tai Chi people and people doing boot camp. And I will come and look at a boot camp. Someone can tell me after the meeting when you meet, and I will come and observe and myself. And if I'm wrong, then I apologize. As to the Ms. Ruttenberg, I think her name was, made, I think, a really good point when she said that, the park is not just for the local people who live nearby. You know, and we've emphasized that with other parks and our uses and stuff. And that is a really relevant point that we have to keep in mind. Yes, we have complaints from people in the local park, and yes, you know, I live across the street from a school, chose to live there. You know, people live across the street on Shoreline. If they're going to live really close, there's going to be some of these issues that come up. That's not to say that we don't need to regulate it and that it hasn't maybe gotten a little out of control, but by the same token, we have to always keep in mind that, you know, you choose to live near something that has a lot of activity, you have some responsibility in that. And the last thing I'll say for right now is I don't think we should overreact. These boot camps sound very interesting, and God knows that we don't want to discourage anybody in Santa Barbara from getting healthier. You know, just walk around town and look. We want to encourage people to get healthier. But, you know, this may well be a fad that doesn't last for a great deal of time. Maybe that, I know some of them lasted 4 or 5 years, and there's a certain number of committed people. And I think it's maybe very much like joining a gym, which I have many times over the years. Sometimes it's lasted a couple years, sometimes 4 or 5. But, you know, then these periods go where you're not in a gym. And it may well be that there's only a certain number of committed people that are going to stay in these programs for long periods of time. So, again, not saying that we don't need to do something, and it's a very thoughtful presentation, but I'll just say let's not, you know, overreact.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez.
I will visit some of the camps, especially the camps because I'm not too familiar with it, to see what level of noise and complaints at what time you start and things like that. And might be a good point to it. And then probably look at different alternatives that have been brought forth. Thank you.
Thank you. As with everything, it's about balance and the use of our parks, and it's about balancing who's in it and whose needs are being met. And also, you know, we have a municipal code here that says you will not have commercial activities in a park without a permit. So we need to tighten up what we do, make it fair and equitable to everyone. And a big question has come up. What are the zoning of the parks we're talking about? Who, you know, that's all of our parks are zoned for certain uses, and we need to make sure that we're in, you know, what we're doing and what we set up. I think as a commission, I am sorry to say I can't off the top of my head do the zoning for every park within the community. So I think I need more information to make a decision on where activities are appropriate or could be appropriate. I also do have a concern about the size of a group, and I think that was an important part of the policies you were talking about. It's a big difference to have 8 people doing something or 25 people doing something. So we need control of that in a public park, if only for the other people's safety. This time of day issue, 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, a lot of times our parks aren't open at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we definitely need to be in compliance with sunrise, right? We have some guidelines that are already in place that we need to bring this activity into that fold so that we're in compliance with all those other things. So I don't see that tonight we're going to make any decisions because, I mean, I really do need some more information, especially on the zoning aspects of it, or, you know, how the park is zoned. And what type of activity we would present. As I understand it, if we went with sort of a hybrid of 1 and 3, we wouldn't be impacting other groups in that they could still go to option 3 into a lottery and get a permit and operate a place. We would have some designated areas that if you wanted to compete in the RFP process, you would do that. Is that correct? And then option 2 is always an option, right? I mean, yes. You can always become a private contractor with our Parks and Rec and operate a program. So we wouldn't have to take that out of the table, off the table. It's still always there. Okay, so I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel. I would like to see it back with maybe refreshing our zoning information for us, our knowledge.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, perhaps I could just add a little bit more of information, especially also a little explanation for some of the people that are here in the audience. I wanted to just talk briefly about how the department, and actually it's a city process, but I'll talk specifically about the department. We're authorized through the city's municipal code to have 2 locations down on the beach where we rent beach rental equipment, and was mentioned in the report. One is kayak rentals, the other is outrigger rentals. And those came out of something similar to this situation, where there was an inundation of people who wanted to run businesses on the city beaches, and the city council at that time determined that it would be appropriate that it was designated in particular areas and limited to a set number of locations. So that is why we looked at that model. And how it works is through the city's bidding process is the city identifies the different terms and conditions. So we would, for instance, I'll just use Shoreline Park as an example, identify a specific location in Shoreline Park and the hours, and then we would look at a minimum bidding amount. It would be a sealed bid that people would submit. So it's not really a bidding war. You would bid once, and whichever bid is that meets the criteria and is the highest. Historically, the bids have not, for the beach locations, have not been outrageously in a bidding war. So I just wanted to, people have been using that term, so I just wanted to define it a little bit more in terms of expectations. And staff look at that option. We were very concerned as we developed options. We know for us in running our class programs how much planning goes into, advanced planning goes into your classes and activities. We work 6 months in advance at a minimum before we put all of our information into our activity guide. So we know the class, we know the location, and all of that goes to print. So taking that into consideration, we looked at the option of doing a vendor license for a specific location as being actually, if someone was a business owner and they wanted to secure that and that was their location, they wanted to be identified with that location, that would be something of value. We were concerned about, that whole planning process and the marketing piece. So I wanted to talk about the RFP process. The second comment that was made was the issue of gender equity. And my understanding of the gender equity issue, we're a Parks and Recreation Department. We have men's teams, women's teams, girls teams, boys teams, and a variety of sports and activities. So the gender equity issue is about equal and fair access. And so if we set up a system and there were no classifications according to gender, and it's simply that's that activity, and we make it fair for everyone, my understanding is that is not an issue. If, in fact, that we need to challenge that more and get a legal opinion from the city attorney, we can do that. But I don't think that we're dealing with gender issues as it regards this activity. Then I also wanted to clarify the moratorium. In our interim plan, we indicated that we put a moratorium on new permits at Shoreline Park. And what that meant was that the no new permits meant that certain groups didn't get a permit, so they had to move away from Shoreline Park. And then there was a group that had a permit that was continuing through a certain time frame. And when that permit ended, then it also was not renewed. So I just wanted to address that from a fairness issue and an equity issue. I know there were allegations of that. That really wasn't what it was about. If you had a permit, you could continue your activity until the end of that permit, and then it ended. So that's the moratorium, and we are continuing to move those groups to different park locations so that the activities can continue. We have a difficulty that until we can establish some kind of a system which is fair for all of the businesses that want to be at Shoreline Park to compete for those spaces, we have to have some kind of a system to make that happen. So that's why we're, at this point, continuing the moratorium on Shoreline Park. The last issue that I wanted to address was the classification of our parks. And I'm not sure that the term neighborhood parks, as it was, I think, assumed in the discussion here tonight, fits with how the city has classified our parks. For instance, I have the list of our parks and how they classified. A neighborhood park, which we have open space parks, passive parks, neighborhood parks, beach parks, community parks, regional parks. I think that's it on the parks. And each of those classifications is specified in the city's municipal code. And they're classified based on what are the elements and the amenities in that park and the expectation of the audience that they're going to serve. So, for instance, neighborhood parks are Bonnet Park, East Side Neighborhood Park, Escondido Park, Hidden Valley, Hilda Ray, Stevens Park, Willow Glen Park. There are others, but I'm just naming a few. And under community parks is Alameda, Chase Palm Park, De La Guerra, Ledbetter, Shoreline Park, Schofield Park. So I'm not sure that that classification, and I don't know with the city of Ventura how they classify neighborhood parks, but I'm assuming that there was a lot of assumption that neighborhood park, using that term tonight, just meant adjacent to a neighborhood. So I just wanted to put that out there and just in terms of informing people about classification.
I do recall when we went through that whole procedure, there were certain activities allowed and not allowed in certain areas. So we need to make sure that, you know, I mean, as I recall, some are not allowed to have lighting or bathrooms or, you know, whatever. And so some are not allowed to have rentals, I believe. So, you know, we have some designations that I think we really do need to factor in as we do this. And I think what I would need is some more information on that and to follow up. I guess my concern would be if we went to an RFP process and we had a single provider in a single area that only serviced females and not both genders, does that put us in, you know, have we kind of narrowed it down to where then we do have a problem? That would be what I'd want to know from the city attorney. It's very different, I think, when you have two leagues or there's, you know, the other guy's right next door that you can go to that camp. But when you specifically say this is our business spot and we only will serve one gender, that to me I have a little problem with.
And I believe that that would be addressed in the criteria, and that's something that we could look at further.
But I would also just like to see what staff recommends as areas that could be used for this type of an activity. You know, if you were to spread this out over the community, what would it look like? I was concerned about the intensity of use when we look at 3 hours in the morning and possibly 3 hours in the evening. That is much different, as Mr. Forsell said, than the 1 hour of Tai Chi. You know, you're operating a full-on business in the park at that point. If you're having back-to-back classes, very different. Even if you pay for a permit, we didn't open a gym, we maintain parks. So those are just different issues to me that I need cleared up before I can go further.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I think additional information should be provided to us as to the areas that are affected to these activities. The number of people that are in those particular areas, the number of permits that we have at the present time, and the sections of the different areas. We have many parks, but I think we are concentrating mainly on the shoreline. And so we can get that information as to the number, the areas, you know, a little map that will identify, and the number of hours that are activities going on related to that particular business.
My only last comment would be that somebody mentioned a priority system. If you go to a lottery for people that have been there a long time and have had their business going and there haven't been complaints because it hasn't overwhelmed the neighborhood. And I think that would only be fair that some kind of priority system be set up for businesses that have been there for 5 or 10 or 15 years or more. You know, they didn't ask for the increased use and create this problem that we have right now. Things went along for an awful long time. It's the first time this has ever come up that I've been on the commission. So I would agree that some kind of priority system, if there is a lottery, should be given to businesses that have been in existence a long time.
Is that?
I think probably the one additional area that I would appreciate the commission providing some guidance on is that truly we do not have the staff resources currently to implement this kind of a lottery system, which is probably going to be conducted, 2 to 4 times a year. It's hard. I would hope that it would be closer to 2 times a year. And that whole process and all of that. So I am concerned currently, and this was in the report, but the fees were set actually much earlier than 2005. The fees were set probably, 6 or 8 years ago, and they were based on nonprofit organizations doing, summer camps at La Mesa Park. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And so I think that because staff will, when we come back with you, will have to have worked out how that lottery system would work and what the impact to staff workload is, and the fees should be sufficient to cover that increased cost. I mean, that's really a challenge, and so I think our goal will be to create something that is not labor intensive, that is, fewer times a year, and so we're not doing it as often. And I think the other thing that we would look at is, it was our thinking on doing the RFP process that we really probably were only looking at, 2 to 3 specific locations. Most likely, maybe 2 different locations in Shoreline Park, because that seems to be the area that is the highest desired park, and it's also the park where we have the most concerns. So if we have an RFP, we're dealing with one company over a period of a year, they get to know, we get to know them, they get to know the people in the park. We can have better relationships for making sure that we're all being good neighbors. And then potentially one other location. We did not envision that the RFP process would need to be in place for those parks which don't have the intense competition for use.
Well, I think that is the consensus up here. I think, but what I see is that there are these other groups, and if these other groups continue to want to operate, and we want to accommodate them in other parks, we do need some mechanism in place to do that. So yes. I think that's why that hybrid made sense to me, and I think we can't go too much farther until staff has identified appropriate locations and we take a look at them, and what you may come up with something. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking Dwight Murphy or some, you may come up with some other places that suddenly, look pretty good, but haven't been thought out before. So it just seems the next step to me is to sort of know on a map what we're dealing with, and then how big a job is it to manage that? And then how do we manage it? It may turn out that somebody's, during this period decides Goleta Beach looks really great and toddles off, or doesn't like the idea that they're not going to be able to have a class before 8 in the morning. I don't know what the rules are going to be, but there may be some things that change the interest level. So does that give you enough to take away to, okay, then do we need a motion to continue this item?
Yes.
And October or November? We will be meeting early in November.
We'll be meeting early in November. I will not be present for the October meeting.
Then November it is.
And I think I would like to spend a little bit more time with staff and really ironing out processes and mapping out the park zones. We did talk about that would be helpful, that when we're talking Shoreline Park, we know we're looking at a specific designated area. Staff has done some preliminary work.
I think that's also beneficial to the public to know what we're looking at. They can't speak to an item if we haven't, if we don't know what we're proposing yet. So I think November is plenty soon enough, and like I said, we'll be meeting a week early, right? So
I think one of the other things is that I think as staff will ask the business owners to come in and meet with us to see from their perspective of the business owners that we're aware of that are doing these types of activities, to come in and meet with us to talk about both options 1 and 3 to see, what, maybe there's some good massaging that could take place with those.
Okay. Do I have a motion to that effect?
Well, okay, I would move under item 6, commercial activities in parks, that we send it back to staff with our comments for further action at the November meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? I guess I would just like to say that we do have to keep in mind what we are doing is commercial activity in parks. I think that's the top, we're not, and the parks are public places, so we do take it very seriously. So, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we have one more item on our agenda.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you
we
all.
We appreciate that.
We will be in touch. Item 9 is a set date for a site visit at West Beach.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, as you know, this West Beach Improvement Project has been before you a few times. We're hoping this is the final review. Assistant Director Jill Zachary has been working most closely with RDA, getting this project through from a parks perspective. She has recommended that we have a site visit the week just prior to your the week of your meeting, so that when you have the presentation, you will already have the maps, and you'll know what the concerns and the issues are, and then you can have a site visit. So assuming that October 21st at noon is a good time for all of the commissioners, that would be our recommendation.
Will lunch be provided if it's at noon?
We'll bring you a sandwich. Typically, we haven't. When we do a site visit, we typically don't.
Thank you. In that case, I am available October 21st at noon.
Okay.
I can be available that date. I know Mr. Gonzalez is in school, so probably most daylight times at this time of year are hard for you. So I think if the other commissioners can make it, we'll try for that. Great. Okay. With that, we
move for adjournment.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We adjourn the meeting. Thank you.